Courtney Fairchild, President and CEO of Global Services. Thanks so much for joining us today on our next installment of The New Normal, where we talk about government contracting in the age of COVID. We are very, very lucky today to have with us Jennifer Bisceglie, the founder and CEO of Interos. Interos is a best-in-class provider of supply chain risk management platform, and Jennifer is, in fact, a global supply chain expert. Jennifer, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks for asking.
Full disclosure, Jennifer is also a friend, so you may find that this
might be trouble.
It's always trouble when we're together, so we'll try and be good today. So we're going to get into the supply chain aspect, but let's start a little bit more personally. There's so many changes for all of us in this time for COVID, and the way that we are both personally and professionally dealing with it. So why don't you tell me first, how are you personally dealing and coping with everything that's going on right now?
So personally, it's been really interesting. We started work from home the week before everybody else did, not for any other reason than we just said, might just make sense. And to stop going to the office every day, there's a lot of pent up energy. So I've noticed I've worked out a lot more.
I was going to say the same thing. You and I have both decided that it would be the time that's what we could do.
Yeah, that's a big focus. And I also realized I had to stop the wine intake because it was just getting out of hand. So, but other than that, knock on wood, it's right. Family's okay. Nobody we know has really been affected, and the business is bouncing along. So
that's really good to hear. So obviously you moved to home. I see that you're in the office today, so you must be transitioning a little bit.
Yep.
How are you doing with your team right now, and sort of what stage are you guys in?
So we are, and it's slow, right? There's so much of this that's emotional and just comfort zone that you really need to be respectful. And so, whereas, I personally might be ready to hop on a plane, not everybody is. And so, interestingly enough, again, the week before this all happened in March, we had actually signed a lease to build out the entire floor above us. And that's continuing because construction is seen as an essential, worker. And so that office is supposed to open the end of October, November timeframe. And when the governor, we're in Virginia, we're in Arlington, and when the governor started going through phases, we thought when phase 2 happened, we'd be ready. So we actually outfitted the office with everything. So there's sanitizer, there's wipes, it's marked. There's signs on the chairs that says, 6 feet apart. The conference rooms are all marked. So we did all of that. But when we have meetings, and we do have a lot of meetings, obviously online like everybody does right now, and we have a twice a week, 15-minute stand up with the whole company, you could just feel the comfort zone wasn't there. I mean, we have people of all ages. We have situations where people live with their families, young kids, all that. So what we did as a company, we just made a decision that said, we're not going to go back to operations as normal in an office until the new floor is built out. So late October, November, we'll make another call then. It'll continue to be volunteer. Having said that, I will say that we are seeing customers coming back. So we actually had a kickoff with one of our Navy customers yesterday here at the office.
Oh, wow.
And and everybody came in. We all wore masks when we moved around. They sat in a conference room with space, and we had bottled water people could take. So it's different, like I'm a big hugger, and you're kind of, hi, how are you? But yeah, I think things are getting back to normal. Last weekend, this week, I tried to do kind of Tuesday to Thursday in the office and Monday and Friday from home. And we'll see how that goes. And my team's been kind of in and out a little bit.
Yeah, I've been able just by myself to go to the office as well. And I find, I thought that I was going to be there 5 days a week because I thought I preferred it. And I'm doing a little bit of both. So I think it's interesting, just the things that we learn about ourselves, our work habits, and everyone else. Before we switch over to supply chain, any tips on keeping morale up, right? So as we said, this is pretty emotional.
Yep.
And I think as a leader, half of the job right now is, keeping people upbeat and keeping morale up. So do you have any good tips for us on that?
So this company is very fortunate, Courtney, because I am the cup is overflowing of excitement, right? So I get up excited every day, but it's real. And so we've done a lot. Interestingly enough, Interos has started doing quarterly employee engagement surveys, and our employee connectedness, the amount our employees felt connected to the business, actually went up 30 points between December and March. And the only thing I can attribute that to is so much of this, the video use is it on purpose. So we always, I won't say always, for the last few years, we had an all hands. We have an office here in Arlington. We have an office in Menlo Park. We have a couple of people sprinkled throughout the states. And we VTC those folks in, but we got everybody here together, and it was a priority. And so we still do that online, but as I mentioned, Tuesday and Friday, every week, we have a 15-minute stand-up, which, as you can tell, I don't stop talking in 15 minutes, so it always goes long. And people are just feeling really connected. In addition to that, we actually, before all this happened, I keep saying that like we think we knew what we were doing, but this just was coincidence, if you will. We actually established a company fun group, and they call themselves the Culture Club. And the reason for that, though, had nothing to do with COVID-19. It was because we are hiring so quickly. We hired 40 people last year. We're hiring over 100 people this year.
Wow,
and it's really hard when you're hiring that quickly to instill culture and values and make people feel connected. So we stood up this Culture Club, which is a one person in every department. And so when you join the department, the first 2 weeks, when you're kind of excited the first day, and then it's no man's land for 2 weeks so you can figure out what your job's supposed to be, you're now adopted by somebody. So that group, while COVID-19 has been going on, has been in hyperdrive. And so we've had online yoga for the company. We have trivia, like tomorrow's Disney, which will probably be the only one that I can actually participate. We have a charity miles competition going on with the company right now. So a lot of drivers that have nothing to do with what we do for a living, but we're about the people aspect and how do we get that sense of community, and then it's all going on.
I think those are some really great ideas, but to your point, the productivity increases, the happier everybody is. And so good that you started it before COVID, but those are really, really great ways to engage everyone and keep them dialed in. I do think we've had the same sort of re-engagement, and because communication is more deliberate, because we are thinking harder and not on auto drive for how we're engaging with each other. I do think it's gotten a little bit better. So I'm going to switch focus and let you talk about your expertise now. There couldn't be any more pertinent topic for us and for you. What an interesting time for your company. Congratulations on the growth and all of that. But tell us what COVID-19 is doing in the supply chain, into the global supply chains, and then we'll get into some government contracting stuff.
Yeah, so you're right. This situation is as horrible and as big of an interruption as it is on multiple levels for Interos has been a global education, if you will, that companies need to think about their extended supply chain, and that's what we do. So we actually just put out a release earlier this week. Our inbound phone calls have gone up over 500% just since March. And that is, we do have a marketing team. Harris is on the call today. We have a great marketing team, great social media campaign, but it's really because for the first time ever, and I've been in this industry for over 20 years, and Interos itself is 15 years old. For the first time ever, Courtney, the topic of global supply chain and exactly where you have an over-reliance in different countries or on companies, vulnerabilities, for the first time ever, it's a board and CEO conversation. And so I think that, if you were to say January of this year, customers would come to us and say, help me identify counterfeits in my supply chain, or the election was a really big topic at that time, and they were talking about where China and Russia influence was in my supply chain. And now the two big questions are, where are my suppliers being impacted by COVID-19? And not just the company, not just the supplier I'm contracted with that we call your third party, but the fourth and the fifth and the sixth, the companies you can't see that you're doing business with, where are they being impacted? And then what's the alternative? What do I do about it? And so it's actually, from a business standpoint, it's focused us even more. And, and I know you want to talk about the government contracting in a minute, but one of the things that we're seeing that's going to drive a lot of these conversations in those veins is two things, is the cybersecurity maturity model certification, CMMC.
For sure.
Which doesn't, again, just look at the prime contracting with the government, but it looks at their extended supply chain and what level of certification. So it's exactly the same problem as what COVID-19 is. And the second one is Section 889, which has to deal with the Chinese, telecom companies, so the Huawei's and the ZTEs, exactly the same. It's not who I'm buying from, it's who they're buying from. And so, like I said, COVID-19 on a global stage educated the world on what Interos does. And so we're just kind of paddling to keep up with it right now.
Yeah, that's an understatement. We have all of our clients are struggling with CMMC and the Huawei and Section 899 issues. So the question becomes, for small business, how do they deal with that? How does a government contractor keep abreast of these regulations and keep compliant with them? These things are getting into our contracts. We were talking yesterday, CMMC creeped into GSA STARS 3, right? Previously was just a DoD issue. And so companies thought, well, maybe if I don't do work with DoD, this won't happen for me. And it's clearly coming over into the civilian side. And the struggle is real. How do we keep up to date? How do we keep just even in the know about, let alone compliant?
Yeah, I think it's a real question. I happen to be on the phone with a lawyer who is very well steeped in this topic. I was talking to him yesterday, and because I asked the same thing. I said, "What do you think about the fact that CMMC ended up in a small business proposal?"
And a small business proposal,
right? And as you know, so much of the conversation around cyber is how small, medium-sized businesses don't know what to do and can't afford it. And then the interesting thing about putting it on, a contract vehicle like STARS is that that's not actually the task order. So now you have created a very big wall that you don't even know what the awards are going to be necessarily used for STARS, but you've said, you might be compliant. And I think it's hard, right? So to your point, the struggle is real. I think that sticking close, all kidding aside, to companies like yours, Global Services, folks that are focused on compliance is really important. One of the challenges with CMMC right now, as well as is a bit of 889, there's no real specific guidance that says this is what you have to do.
Right.
And at the same time, I'll tell you, we don't want the government telling us exactly what to do, right? We want policy, we want direction, but it should be up to every business how they implement that. And that's just part of the fun of being a democracy. But knowing if you're compliant and knowing when you need to be compliant, it's hard. And there is actually no book on how to do it right yet.
Yeah, and I think that the cost of compliance is where everybody's going to get nailed, because you can make sure that you are compliant, but I do not believe that the government end user is ready to pay for what that is, right?
So it's interesting because Katie Arrington, who has done most of the speaking on CMMC, one of the things I have a lot of respect, because she goes out there and she says it will cost.
Yes.
It will cost the private sector. It will cost the government. And so the interesting thing here, if we were to theorize, is what does that do to the whole, lowest cost technically available award season? If you think about the fact that, CMMC is a little bit different, but if you look at CMMC, because it looks at kind of the holding of information, But if you just kind of be really specific and look at the concerns that come with using commercial technology for CMMC as well as 889, you think about the way those contracts are awarded. Those contracts are normally a long list of CLINs of commercial technology that the government just buys off of. And so the only way for a supplier to win that contract is to have best cost at all times. And so to your point, when something like CMMC gets put broadly on a STARS contract, no one knows how to bid on that because they don't know what is acceptable. They don't know what's compliant because they don't know what they're really bidding on. And that's going to be interesting.
It's very similar to bidding almost any IDIQ or large GWAC because, you know, the task order level will inform you what you're going to really need in terms of personnel, what you're really going to need in terms of security or anything else. So, you know, you're always sort of in that spot, but this is becoming more and more complicated. So, I don't want to take up your entire morning, so we'll make it quick, but tell us some best practices for global supply chain right now, right? So you guys have a platform that many businesses are using to try to assess their supply chain and find the risk in it. What are some best practices that we can start today in terms of COVID, but just in general as well?
Yeah, I think there's three big ones that I talk about a lot. You know, the first one is actually know who your suppliers are, right? And not just who your suppliers are, but who their suppliers are. And if you think of what happened with personal protection equipment when Ford decided to start making ventilators, they were not an OEM. Somebody had to declare what the sub-tier suppliers were. So you have precedence. And so really understanding and having a relationship with those suppliers, Courtney, gone are the days where everything just happens via, mail. It's you actually want to know the business practices of that supplier. So the first thing is know the suppliers. The second is honestly know what your vulnerabilities are so that you understand how to apply risk management principles, because the same supplier might cause me a different risk than you because of how you and I run our businesses. So really understand where you're vulnerable. And then the last is continuous monitoring. And I think that that's been the biggest change across the market. And cyber actually led this over 5, maybe 10 years ago now, in that it's never the day that you look at the supplier that it's the problem, it's the day after. And so I think those three things, it's know who you're dealing with, know who you're doing business with, understand where your vulnerabilities are, and then monitoring against them constantly wins the day.
Yeah, to assume that nothing changed between today, tomorrow, and next week, I think is where people fall down. They may have done that assessment. That's a really good point. Well, thank you so much for being with us. I cannot tell you how fun this is for me. Before we end, any passing thought, final thought in terms of anything that we're really talking about?
There's so much going through my head. One, thank you so much for asking. I think this is fabulous. I enjoy being, part of your world. You've worked with us and supported us and made sure that we won proposals for most of the 15 years that we've been in business. So thank you very much for all of that. I've learned a lot. And we've won a lot, so that's all good. I think that, not to sound too Ellen DeGeneres, but it's like be kind to yourself and be kind to each other. It's a hard time right now. Yeah. And just the flexibility, I think, that COVID-19 cost and taught all of us is something that I hope that we all keep for a while.
I think that's such a great point. Thank you. For me, it's about remembering this. My big fear is that we've learned some of these lessons and that we'll let go of it. And I think there's so much positive that has come with the negative, and we need to hold on to some of that. So thanks again. Everyone else, thanks for joining us on the new normal. We enjoy doing this so much. We will see you on the next installment, and have a great week.